Every day, every single day, things are happening in the world of deals and deal makers. And there's never enough time to keep up with every company, transaction, announcement, or whatever. It's just exhausting. And we have a new product to help fix that. This is Axios Pro Deals, a new premium subscription product bringing you tailor-made insights like never before. For the last 5 years, Axios has helped deal professionals navigate the whole deal landscape with Pro Rata. With Axios Pro Deals, we're diving deeper into the industries that matter most to you. You just want stories on fintech? There's a newsletter for that. MedTech deals? We've got you covered. The future of retail? We'll guide you. With Axios Pro Deals, you're going to be getting all of this industry-specific insight and expert analysis at a level you simply can't get anywhere else. So if you're a venture capitalist, private equity investor, banker, trader, founder, executive, anyone who cares about deals, Axios Pro is what you need to help you understand what matters and why. Start your free trial today at axiospro.com.
Welcome to the Infodemic Age virtual event. I'm Alexi McCammond, National Political Reporter at Axios, coming to you from Washington, D.C. Welcome to our audiences on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Axios.com. Join the conversation today on Twitter with @Axios and #AxiosEvents. Over the next 30 minutes, I'll be joined by my colleague, Tina Reed. We will take a look at the real-world impacts of misinformation on public health and climate action. Well, our first guest is the National Climate Advisor at the White House, Gina McCarthy, joining us from Boston, Massachusetts. It's good to see you, Ms. McCarthy.
Thanks. It's great to see you as well.
Well, thank you so much for doing this event with us. One of the big headlines coming out of this week, of course, was the president invoking the Defense Production Act for clean energy investments. Is the move from the president too late?
No, it isn't too late. I mean, it's consistent with his commitment to really take action on climate change, is understanding that climate change poses an existential threat. And as we look at the science, we need to move faster and faster. Last year, we had more wind, solar, and battery storage than we've ever had before. But there was a challenge with keeping that going this year. And that's exactly what the president addressed as quickly as and emphatically as he could, because he didn't want to just bring in more solar panels into the US. He wanted to really get domestic production ramped up in this country, which we think we can really make progress on in a couple of years using our own resources, as well as the resources of the private sector, who seem to be all in, which is one of the big changes in climate world these days, is we have answers, we have solutions. The question is, how quickly can we accelerate them?
Mm-hmm. And, of course, news broke earlier today, the president and vice president are out west at the Summit of the Americas, and they are set to announce 2 initiatives on climate change and boosting clean energy in Latin America and the Caribbean nations. Is there any more news you can share with us on that, or at least kind of give us a sense of the scale of these initiatives?
Well, the scale is clearly as big as we can get it. I mean, the United States recognizes that domestically, which are the issues that I deal with every day, we have to be a leader. We have to show that the United States is all in. When you're a leader in greenhouse gas emissions, you have to be a leader in resolving that challenge. And that's what the president's commitment is all about. And he recognizes that as he looks in to these engagements, whether it's the broader Americas or whether it's larger than that, we have to show that we're all in, and we have to provide the kind of support that we need for other countries that will allow the world to take the actions we need to address this. Because after all, this is a planetary problem that impacts people throughout the world today.
Mhm. And I know that a big part of your job is simply making sure that people understand the link between climate change and public health and how that affects all of us, not just here in the US, but across the world. We've also seen rampant mis and disinformation around climate change online and in other platforms for a while now. How has that made your job harder?
Oh, well, it continues to make my job difficult. Look, I've been working on climate issues for a long time. And what we saw in the 70s and 80s, when we were working on these challenges, and in particular in the 80s, we saw that the fossil fuel companies were actually using dark money and playing off the playbook of the tobacco industry to figure out how they could seed denial of the challenge of climate, as the tobacco companies did to seed denial about the illnesses and the deaths that were related to cigarette smoke. And so now we had a problem in the 70s and 80s, but now that problem has shifted. Now it's moved from denial, but the dark money's still there. The fossil fuel companies are still basically trying their best to make sure that people don't understand the challenge of climate. But now it's not so much about denying the problem. Now the challenge really is, how do we accelerate the solutions we have available to us, the technology improvements that we've seen that are most cost effective, in fact, cost competitive with fossil fuels. And what the industry is now doing is seeding basically doubt about the costs associated with that and whether they work or not. Alexis, we have so many examples of this. One clear one was the wind turbine issue in Texas, when Texas was having problems with their energy system and supply because of a freeze. Their energy system shut down. And the first thing that we read in the paper was it was because of those wind turbines. Well, within seconds, if not hours, we had all kinds of information showing that was clearly not the case. And yet that began the mantra. That began the dialogue that people on the Hill, who didn't want the fossil fuel transition to move to clean energy, was raising this issue over and over again, and you still see it. And so the challenge is, now that we're moving from denial to actually just trying to disengage the public from understanding the values of solar energy, the values of wind energy, the benefits of clean energy. We have to get tighter. We have to get better at communicating. And frankly, the tech companies have to stop allowing specific individuals over and over again to spread disinformation. That's what the fossil fuel companies pay for. That's what folks who make money out of fossil fuels and don't make money and don't care about saving consumers costs. That's what they do. We have to be smarter than that, and we need the tech companies to really jump in. We've had a lot of NGOs working on these issues, and it's been terrific. The Climate Action Campaign has been working on pushing back on this disinformation. And Friends of the Earth has done a great job and continuing to do a great job at basically looking at where this money is coming from, how it's trying to fool folks. And what we see now is that climate denial is not working because people can see the problems out there. They're experiencing firsthand. They can't deny it anymore. So what they're really targeting is our inability to accelerate the answers to climate, the technologies we need moving forward. That is equally dangerous to denial, because we have to move fast.
And I so appreciate all of those points, especially the historical context, because folks need to know that this has been around for a while. They're trying new tactics, but you've seen it unfold and evolve over the years. Isn't misinformation and disinfo around climate a threat to public health itself?
Oh, absolutely. And it's not just denial of this, it's also greenwashing. You have these companies that are claiming to be part of the solution that really are just not informing people about what they're really doing and how they're really investing, and how people should be investing their money if they really care about climate. That's why the president has really stepped up with the SEC and others, trying to actually make sure that these big companies are truthfully talking about what they do and how they do it, so that folks can have an understanding of their risks when they're investing. But let me hit the public health issue, because that's one of the big challenges that we face, is fossil fuel companies and climate change are posing a significant threat to public health. That's one of the big reasons why we need to address climate change. Look, President Biden doesn't focus on, and neither do I, on bashing the fossil fuel companies, but frankly, they have to get their act together. And we have to get our act together as a country to recognize that clean energy is the solution. Fossil fuels have actually created significant health challenges in our country, not just climate change, but we're talking about pollution that's impacting people's lives. We're talking about billions of human beings every year across the world dying because it's related to climate or fossil fuels. We are talking about really risks that no longer need to be tolerated to our communities, which is why President Biden is really shifting his narrative on climate, not about climate, but about climate solutions, about the opportunities that the United States has to lead the clean energy revolution, not just to save the planet, but to strengthen our economy, to allow us to benefit from the solutions available to us, to keep people healthier, to protect communities from the dangers that climate change poses, so that we can build in a way that's resilient. He's talking about protecting people today, growing our economy today, growing new jobs, union jobs that pay real money, and growing those today. That's what our domestic climate action is all focused on. Yes, it will push back on the fossil fuel companies, because as we transition to clean energy, we need less and less investments in fossil fuels. But if you see what's happening in Ukraine today, if you see what despots can do, they can hold the United States hostage and increase our energy costs simply because we're too reliant on fossil fuels.
I so appreciate your time. Before I let you go, you have done a great job explaining what the president has done on this, but he's of course not alone in helping find solutions on climate action. The
That's
Hill hasn't been able to pass his Build Back Better package, which has historic investments in climate. I'm just curious, two things from you. One, do you think folks on the Hill understand the urgency of what needs to be done? And two, what do you hope comes out of these conversations and negotiations between Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and Senator Joe Manchin?
Well, I think it's been terrific that we've had the bipartisan infrastructure law move forward. It was really important and had a lot of investments in solutions to climate, like advancements in the grid and shifts to clean energy. But we need to do more, and that's what the president's calling for. And so we do see Congress taking action on these issues. We do see them trying to tackle the misinformation that's out there, trying to hold companies accountable. And so I'm very confident as conversations continue between Joe Manchin and Chuck Schumer, two really folks that can talk to one another. Hopefully, we'll be able to get actions moving forward on the Build Back Better bill. I'm confident that we will, and it's important that that happen, because we need every tool in our toolbox if we hope to address the existential challenge of climate change. And we need to make sure, as we're doing now, that we invest in the communities that are disbenefiting, that are actually losing coal units and job growth. And we start investing in them to make sure that no community and no individual is left behind. And in fact, these communities, these environmental justice communities, get the majority of the benefits that are coming from these challenges and the programs that we're operating now to make sure that everybody benefits with this shift to climate change, not just the planet, but our health, our well-being, our economy, our jobs. This is what we want to benefit today with the actions that we're taking to protect the planet for our kids.
White House National Climate Advisor Gina McCarthy, thank you so much for joining us today and shedding light on these very important topics. We appreciate you.
Great to be here. Thanks.
And next, we have A View from the Top with Chris Freites.
Thanks, Alexi. And thank you to our sponsor, 3M, for making this conversation possible. And now joining me from Minneapolis, Minnesota, is 3M's corporate scientist and chief science advocate, Dr. Jayshree Sait. Dr. Sait, welcome to Axios.
Thank you for having me, Chris.
So you recently released the 3M State of Science Index, which showed that people around the world are more likely to recognize the importance of science today than they were even 5 years ago. What issues do people want science to prioritize?
Yes, we recently released the 2022 State of Science Index results. It's the fifth year of this third-party independent research we do to understand and explore the global attitudes towards science. And this year, our results show that the top issues Americans want science to solve beyond the pandemic are clean water, air quality, equal access to healthcare, and climate change. So essentially, people expect science to drive sustainability and social impact and solutions for health and equity challenges. And the great news is that a very strong majority of Americans, 86%, they say people should follow science to help make the world more sustainable. And they believe that science can help minimize the effects of climate change. When it comes to healthcare specifically, we found that beyond the current pandemic, people say science should prioritize cures for chronic diseases, cancer treatments, addressing mental and emotional health issues, and vaccines for future pandemics.
And this index took a look at a lot of really important issues. And one of those was misinformation. What did your findings reveal about misinformation and its impact on scientific credibility?
Yeah, the 2022 results show that regardless of subject matter, most Americans say misinformation is prevalent on social media and traditional news. 72% of Americans say they trust science-based facts in traditional news. 37% say they trust science-based facts on social media. And it is a problem if people can't trust the science information they are getting. It's a problem for people, it's a problem for society, and it's a problem for science and its future. Science relies in many ways on the trust of the public, and the public relies on the trust in science, and misinformation can really undermine this relationship.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about those consequences. What consequences do you see if misinformation continues to proliferate the way it has been and the trust in science news erodes?
Yeah, I mean, addressing concerns about widespread misinformation is important because our study found that Americans believe widespread misinformation can pose a threat to scientific credibility. And there will be consequences if we can't trust news stories about science. More public health crisis, greater division within society, and an increase in the severity of climate change impact. These were the top three consequences of misinformation the public cited. A silver lining, though, is that most Americans trust scientists. More than 3/4 want to hear more from scientists about their work. So this presents an opportunity for scientists to directly communicate on news and social media platforms, for them to be more visible and to be more vocal.
And you also asked Americans about diversity. In fact, the 3M State of Science Index found that 87% of Americans believe it's important to increase diversity, equity, and inclusion in the STEM fields. So my question is, what can we do as a society to bolster the number of women and underrepresented minorities who are working in STEM fields?
Yeah, it's great to see that most Americans agree it's important to increase diversity in STEM fields. They acknowledge that STEM equity needs significant work. What it means to me is that people seem to understand that a diverse workforce is a robust workforce, and that increasing diversity will increase innovation. And a diverse STEM workforce will also lead to a more positive perception of science when people see that the scientific community reflects broader society. They may be more likely to trust the information they're seeing and hearing. So this can help combat misinformation. And to your question about how can we help the case of diversity in STEM and help increase representation, we need to make the barriers faced by underrepresented minorities more visible so we can work together to break them down, because it is critical to ensuring a robust and diverse pipeline of STEM talent. And STEM equity is a complex, multifaceted issue, and it requires action from the entire stakeholder spectrum: students, parents, teachers, educators, mentors, peers, employers. And it has a strong role of family and schools and community and society and culture. It's not just the access to STEM, it is the exposure, it is the encouragement, it is the engagement, it's the economics of a STEM education, it's the empowerment people feel to pursue STEM. And so we need progress along all these vectors in the entire spectrum, and that is what is needed to achieve equity. And I'm proud of 3M's efforts, and we're trying to help address the issue of STEM equity at every point in this educational and career journey. One of our efforts that I'm really excited about is our 3M docuseries. It's called Not the Science Type, and it portrays diverse scientists who have shattered the stereotypes of who enters, who persists, and who excels in STEM. And we know, the last 2+ years have clearly shown us that there is an urgent need for a broader perspective and social context for science by building a more diverse science community and science as a more inclusive space. So the way I like to say it is, at the end of the day, our world requires innovation. Innovation needs science. Science demands diversity, and diversity warrants equity.
The circle of life. We'll have to leave it there. Dr. Jayshree Seth is 3M's corporate scientist and chief science advocate. Dr. Seth, thank you so much for joining Axios.
Thank you for having me.
Now over to Axios healthcare editor, Tina Reed.
I'm Tina Reed, and I'm the healthcare editor at Axios. And our final guest is the director of the National Institute on Minority Health and Health Disparities at the National Institutes of Health, Eliseo Pérez-Stable, joining us from Washington, D.C. Welcome.
Thank you, Tina. And it's a pleasure to be here with your audience.
So obviously, we're here today to talk about misinformation in the context of public health. But I wanted to start with offering a state of play, particularly for the members of our audience who perhaps don't come from a healthcare background. So could you start by sort of putting the landscape or painting the picture of the landscape of what have we been seeing when it comes to this problem of misinformation and healthcare?
Well, misinformation in healthcare is not a new problem. We've had it for decades. I'm a former primary care clinician. I worked as a general internist for 37 years, and people always have different conceptions about the cause of disease or illness, from that trauma I had in my shoulder caused my breast cancer, to I'm exposed to cold weather without proper cover, and I therefore get a cold or pneumonia. And most of the time, these things are not serious. They're not preventing people from getting healthcare. They're not leading people to really getting wrong healthcare. But in the era of information technology that we live in, with such rapid turnaround of information, such rapid dissemination, there can be a lot of misinformation disseminated that can cause harm. And we saw that in real time during the vaccine. We were hearing things like, oh, they're injecting a chip in you to monitor you. And our initial reaction, our scientific clinician reaction was, oh, this is ridiculous. We'll just tell them that's not true. Unfortunately, that wasn't good enough. And what we really got behind on misinformation science, on communication science, I should say, of how we as scientists really formulate, not just do the discoveries and put forth the therapies, but also think, how are we going to communicate this to the world, to our audience? Because if we do great things and then there's no uptake, or people are just misinterpreting what we're communicating, then we are not going to be nearly as successful as we unfortunately have seen with COVID-19 vaccine.
And obviously, there's been a lot of focus in other areas of this sort of so-called infodemic when we look at platforms like social media. Um, can you talk about some of the sources of misinformation you saw in the context of the fact that there was also a lot of public health messaging, a lot of media messaging going on during the pandemic that was also, I guess, problematic?
Yes, because our public health institutions, organizations were not as coordinated as they could have been in the initial messaging. That's number one. That was a challenge. A second real challenge is that there was a lot of fear in the population. Is an unknown. We're confronting a new pathogen that was spread rather quickly by respiratory transmission. So it wasn't, you didn't need intimate contact or exposure to a certain area or animal. I mean, this was just walking into the supermarket and potentially getting infected. So it was an appropriate reaction of, we don't really know, this is really serious, this is a public health emergency. And I think that many of us really tried to coordinate and orchestrate that in that way. Uh, Clinically, and also from a public perspective, one has to still transmit that we are going to approach this in a systematic way. We'll communicate what we know in a systematic way, in clear, concrete terms. And somewhere we weren't able to do that. There were some challenges related to the government response, but by and large, the commitment to do this correctly was there. At the same time, we saw the emergence of, well, in the absence of a clear message, or that the emergency was really not going away in a few weeks like we thought it might, or a few months, a surge of misinformation about what was going on. Government conspiracy. Oh, what is the real cause of this? We're going to go against anything the government tells us to do. So things as simple as wearing a mask in a public space became politicized. And then I think there was a third component, which has not been discussed as much, which was malignant intent to misinform. Whether this, who was interested in doing this, I don't have that kind of information, but there was clear effort to purposely reach out to populations that were susceptible to this message, and then drive further misinformation into those communities. Our expertise at NIMHD, Minority Health and Health Disparities, is with minority communities. And we work hard to address that at the beginning, on the vaccine rollout, and then subsequent to that. So I think that's the perspective that I can also share with you.
Terrific. I'd love to talk to you a little bit more about what you mean by that malignant intent. I know you said that you can't really say specifically who it would be, but in generalities, I mean, are we talking about some of these organized groups that we've heard about on social media? Are we talking about state actors? I mean, what are we talking about when we talk about this misinformation problem targeting certain groups, and how is that sort of playing out in real time?
Based on some of the things I saw, I think both. There were groups that were organized on the basis of, having an agenda against anything that was being done from the government perspective or the public health perspective, and opposing it. So rather than have a conversation about rational thinking, it became more of a position based on, this is my belief. And I do think there probably were state actors, but that's well beyond the scope of my work, so I can't comment further. And there's
Okay.
potential to do harm to our more susceptible communities, and I think the countering that with message from the organized physician groups, from your local trusted leaders in communities, some engagement with some of the celebrities or well-known persons from media personalities, rap artists, or different representatives who would stand up and say, we stand with science, we trust the science, let's work together on this. And I think that effective message did get through to the point where we were able to counter that in the African American, Latino, and Asian American and other racial and ethnic minority communities.
That's really been a common thread throughout the pandemic. Was combating vaccine hesitancy really came down to community level messaging. Can you talk
Mhm.
about how to get that sort of messaging right versus the wrong way to do that?
So in my view, the most effective way of communicating about health, health messages like this, is from a health professional who is a trusted member of a community. So rather than have me get up on the, on the pulpit and tell people I can do that, I can give interviews, I can talk to people. Have your local doctor, nurse, or health advocate uh, do that at your local community level. We know that from other research and other health messaging that that's the most effective way of getting that across. We need the organized leaders of communities, whether they be faith-based, clinicians, other community organizations, to be behind this, to support this, so that because people are going to listen to whether it be something coming from the NIH or the CDC, but then they're going to want to validate it with, oh, they're someone they trust, someone they've seen, or a neighbor or a colleague. So I think this has to become a coordinated national effort to address this. Consistent, simple messages. We don't need nuance. Oh, there's a risk of this or risk of, I mean, and doctors and scientists always think about, well, the probability of. We have to just say, well, this is what we know, this is what we don't know, and this is what we need to do now. And that will calm most people, I think, and also get us to do the not to be misinformed and then avoid getting the proper management.
And that actually leads really well into my last question, which is, as we're looking at the spread of another infectious disease, monkeypox, and
Mhm.
there, I'm sure, will be others on the horizon. We're not done with COVID yet. What do you think is
Absolutely.
the most important message to walk away with when it comes to getting clear public health messages across and combating this misinformation problem?
Number one, we need to have sort of a presence on the ground. I think having a community engaged presence that starts locally but needs support from the federal or central organizations is essential. And then we need an organized, coordinated theme so that we're not having one organization say one thing, another organization say another thing, and then people say, well, you're not even agreeing among each other, so how can who am I to believe? I think that could lead to more confusion and harm. Fortunately, monkeypox doesn't seem to be a serious threat, but this respiratory pathogen issue will continue to be a threat, and there will likely be other respiratory pathogens coming down the pike, either another coronavirus or another flu virus or something that will be like what we've experienced the last 2.5 years. Um,
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
I really appreciate the opportunity, Tina, and thank you for this interview.
Thank you all for joining us this afternoon for another virtual conversation that has made everyone smarter, faster. For more reporting on the real world impacts of mis and disinformation, or to sign up for Vitals or our sneak peek newsletters, visit axios.com/newsletters or visit us on the Axios app. Thank you all for joining, and we'll see you next on axios.com.